Part 1. Moving.
It all started when Amy found an ad for a house on the outskirts of a small village called Woodville, lost in the New England woods. The house stood alone among centuries-old pine trees, with peeling walls and windows with Gothic arches that looked like empty eye sockets. The price was suspiciously low, but for her, tired of the endless hustle and bustle of the city, it was almost a miracle. The city exhausted her. The endless shouts, the noise of traffic, the light pollution, the crowds of people. She longed for silence, for fresh air, for a place where she could concentrate and finally finish the manuscript she had been trying to write for 3 years. The buying process went surprisingly quickly. The real estate agent asked almost no questions, and the paperwork was completed in a matter of days. The only person who showed concern was Amy's friend Molly. She tried to talk her out of moving more than once, telling her that nothing good ever happened in places like this, especially if the house was in the woods and 3 times below market value. Amy didn't listen. She wanted peace. She wasn't interested in tales of strange noises at night and moldy ghosts. She didn't believe in mysticism. She was interested in silence, concentration, and solitude. In the fall, late September, she arrived in Woodville. A thick coniferous forest stretched around the village, soaked with moisture and the smell of rotting leaves. The narrow road ended at an old rusty fence, beyond which stood her new home, a 2-story house with a shabby porch and a moss-covered roof. As soon as Amy crossed the threshold, she had a strange sensation, as if the house, breathing the smell of old wood, dust, and something else was in the air, faintly perceptible, like the distant scent of fresh flowers. The creak of floorboards beneath her feet seemed like a greeting. The house wasn't in the best condition, but that was fine with Amy. It looked like it belonged to another era. The massive staircase, the carved furniture, the fireplace in the living room, the old library with books covered in centuries-old dust. It was atmospheric. She felt this was the place where she could finally write. She slept soundly the first night, tired from the road, but on the second, she woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. A whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind. Old house, gaps in the windows, maybe drafts. But the longer she lay in the darkness, the more clearly she recognized the words. The woman's voice seemed to be humming an old lullaby in an incomprehensible language. The intonation was affectionate, but there was a cold emptiness to it, as if the voice didn't belong to a living person. Amy got up, turned on the light, and walked around the house, checked the doors, the windows, the basement. No one, just empty rooms and shadows dancing from her flashlight. She put it down to imagination. New place, stress, darkness. Such things are easy to conjure up when you're alone. But the next night, the whispering returned. The voice sounded closer now, like it was coming from the attic. It repeated the same words, but between them it flashed other words, barely discernible, fragmented, like her name. Amy stiffened in bed, feeling a chill run down her spine. When she pulled herself together and went up to the attic, she found nothing but dust, cobwebs, and a few old chests. But when she went back down to the bedroom, she found that the door she had definitely left open was now tightly shut.
Part 2. Footsteps upstairs. After the 3rd night, Amy began to write down everything that happened. She started with a diary in which she entered every little detail. Sounds, times, sensations, even dreams. At first she did it for herself, to prove that everything could be explained rationally. But with each page, the fear seeped deeper. On the 4th night, she awoke again to a rustling sound. It wasn't just a whisper. It was footsteps. Right above her, in the attic, someone was walking slowly. The boards creaked under the weight. One step, a second, a third, a pause, then the creak again, as if someone was turning around. At first, Amy froze with horror, unable even to breathe. She stared up at the ceiling, where the shadow of the nightlight trembled slightly, and waited for the sounds to stop. But they didn't stop. It seemed like someone wasn't just walking, but wandering around looking for something, or someone. She couldn't stay in bed. With shaky hands, she pulled out a flashlight and slowly headed upstairs. Each step up the stairs echoed with a thud in her temples. The attic door was ajar, and yet, as she climbed up, silence, not a sound. Spiders, dust, old things. In one corner was a child's high chair with a wiped-out seat on which lay a rag doll with no eyes. Amy felt everything inside her clench. Her breathing quickened. The air in the attic was colder than the rest of the rooms and smelled sour. She stepped back and closed the hatch, too sharply. It slammed shut with a clatter, the sound traveling through the house like the clang of a bell. Back in bed, she couldn't sleep for the first time in a long time. Her heart was pounding, her body covered in sweat despite the chill. She turned on the television, just to get some sound, but at some point the picture began to shake, to distort, as if the signal were interfering with something invisible. When the screen went blank for a second, she saw herself in the black reflection, only her reflection didn't move. Part 3. Faces Behind the Glass. On the 6th day, something changed in the house. Amy began to notice that things weren't laying the way she'd left them. Books in the library were shifted, some open on certain pages. In the bathroom, the mirror was covered in sweat, as if someone had just taken a hot shower, even though the boiler had been turned off that night. One afternoon, walking past the kitchen window, she felt someone's presence, a gaze. She turned around sharply, and for a moment she saw someone's face behind the glass. It was indistinct, pale, with empty eyes. A second, and no one. She sprinted out into the street, peering into the trees. No one, not a sound, not a trace, only the pines swaying in the wind and the rustle of leaves beneath her feet. In the night, she heard the voice again. This time it was calling her name. Amy, It was gentle, almost caressing, as if it were singing, but in that caress lurked something rotten, sinister, like a rotting rose in a beautiful vase. She felt that the voice was not outside, it was inside the house. Sometimes it sounded just outside the door. Sometimes it seemed to whisper in her ear as she lay in the dark. She began to hide all the mirrors in the house. Their reflections were no longer reliable. Sometimes they showed not her, or her, but with black eyes. One time, as she passed a mirror in the hallway, she noticed her reflection didn't move, even though she had already walked on. When she returned, the mirror was empty. Part 4. Basement. On the 8th day, she ventured down to the basement. She had avoided it until then. The door had always been locked with an old, rusty deadbolt, but now, for some reason, it had been ripped off. Amy took the flashlight and went down. At first all she could see were walls, brick, cobwebs, but when she pointed the light into the far corner, she noticed something strange. There was writing on the wall, scratched out with fingernails, entire phrases. She's not leaving, she's in the walls. I haven't slept in 6 days. You can hear her now, too. In another corner lay an old pair of children's shoes. There were 5 pairs of them, different sizes, like they belonged to different children. Feeling the ground go from under her feet, Amy ran upstairs. On the steps, she tripped, the flashlight flying out of her hands and shattering. She jumped out into the light and slammed the basement door shut, pushing the dresser against it. And for the first time ever, she burst into tears. Part 5. Inside the Walls. After her visit to the basement, Amy stopped sleeping. Every night, the house took on a life of its own, whispering, creaking, calling. The walls groaned, as if trying to exhale something, to tell her, to warn her. She had almost stopped eating. Her face had turned gaunt, purple circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled like a fever patient's. But she couldn't leave. The house wouldn't let her go. The phone wouldn't pick up. The internet was gone. The car wouldn't start, even though it had been running last night. She tried walking to the village, but it was as if the road had disappeared. Every direction led her back to the house. No matter how she walked, the woods changed, looped, brought her back to the porch, where the door was always slightly ajar. It was as if the house was waiting, knew she would return. On the ninth night she awoke to a sound, not a whisper, a scream, a child's, shrill, desperate. It was coming from somewhere in the walls. She ran through the house in a panic, knocking on wood, listening. The scream repeated itself, over and over again. Sometimes it broke into a wail, sometimes into a soundless wheeze. She picked up the hammer and began pounding on the bedroom wall. The wood broke, the boards cracked, and under layers of plaster, wallpaper, and plaster, she found a door, small, like a trapdoor, no handle, no lock, just a square, nailed shut. She pulled the nails out, ripped the lid off, and a dark, narrow passage opened behind her. She crawled through on all fours, holding the flashlight to her chest. The passage went between the walls, dust, cobwebs, the smell of rot. The floor was sticky. When she reached the end, a tiny room opened up in front of her. 4 walls, no windows. In the corner was a mattress, and on it lay a little girl. At first glance, it looked like a skeleton wrapped in an old blanket, but as Amy approached, the little girl opened her eyes. They were black, no pupils, and in those eyes was such pain, such hatred, such ancient longing, that Amy screamed. The girl reached out to her. At that moment the walls of the room stirred. They were breathing, and whispered, "You found her. You're part of it now." Part 6. The Denouement. Amy woke up in the morning on the floor of the library, dirty, in tattered clothes, with wounds on her arms. The trapdoor was no longer there, not in the bedroom, not anywhere. There was no trace of the passage between the walls either. Everything was in place. It was as if nothing had happened. But the mirror in the hallway didn't reflect her. The woman standing in it looked like Amy, only slightly different. Her face was slightly elongated, her eyes dark, her gaze blank. When she raised her hand, the reflection didn't repeat the motion. Amy stepped back and ran out of the house. This time the road found itself. The car started. The village greeted her as if nothing had happened. The inhabitants, old men with empty eyes, just looked at her and were silent. She left, vowed to forget everything. 2 years passed. Amy never came back to Woodville. She didn't sell the house. She just left it. She made herself believe it was just a nervous breakdown. She got her life back together, got a job, even started writing. Almost forgot everything. Almost. One evening she received a letter. The envelope was unmarked and unaddressed. Inside was a child's drawing. A house with Gothic windows, pine trees, and a little girl in black on the porch. In the corner was a child's handwriting. "You're still inside. You just haven't woken up yet." When Amy looked up, it wasn't her face in the mirror across the hall again. The end.
My name is Michael Gray. I've been a trucker for 15 years. I've seen a lot of things, accidents, strange people, animals on the road, but that night on a forest road in Michigan, it changed me. I still don't know if it was a mind game or something much scarier. It was the fall of 2017. I was driving a load from Detroit to a small town near the Canadian border. Everything was going according to plan, but on the approach to the imminent 75 highway, the navigator started glitching. It restarted, lost satellites, and then gave me an alternate route. The road looked like a regular country road, narrow, but okay at first. I thought it would save time, so I turned off. After a few kilometers, the weirdness began. The road narrowed to the point where the truck could barely feed. Trees overhung the cap, and there was not a single streetlight, house, or car, just the forest, and silence, dead, oppressive silence. The navigator shut off completely. The phone lost signal. That's when I saw the first sign. Danger. No driving after sunset. Something inside me clenched, but it was impossible to turn around. I continued on my way. About 20 minutes later, I noticed a figure on the side of the road. A woman, standing there, not moving. I thought she needed help, but when the headlights illuminated her face, my heart sank. Her eyes were empty, literally. No pupils, no irises, a white veil, and the skin was grayish pale, like it was dead. I sped up, didn't stop. When I looked in the mirror, she was gone, like she wasn't even there. For the next half hour, I drove like a dream. The fog was starting to roll in, and the trees were getting more and more gnarled and creepy, like they were burning or rotting right at the root. I began to smell the odor of burning. Then I noticed that the temperature in the cabin had dropped dramatically. I turned on the heater, but it wasn't warming. And then the radio rang by itself. I didn't turn it on. It hissed, and then in a harsh voice said, "You shouldn't be here." I tried to turn it off, but it kept going. Even when I unplugged the wire, the sound intensified into an unintelligible howl. Then something happened that I still can't get my head around. The headlights caught another figure, this time a child. He was standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes, and the truck came to a stop a few feet away. I jumped out of the cab, yelling at him to get away, but the boy just raised his hand and pointed into the woods. And that's when I heard footsteps, lots of footsteps. Figures started coming out of the woods toward the road. Men, women, children. Their faces were disfigured. Some were missing eyes. Some were missing a lower jaw. I jumped back into the cab and started the engine. The clutch rattled and the wheels slipped, but I drove. I tried not to look around, but with my peripheral vision, I could see figures running alongside, banging on the cab, scratching the body. At the next bend, the road suddenly ended, just a cliff. There was a ravine. I braked sharply, almost hitting a tree. It was over. I was trapped. The car couldn't turn around, and going backwards was my greatest fear. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the cab. I decided to walk, in case there was help nearby, but as soon as I took 10 steps, I heard branches cracking behind me. I turned around and there was no one, but then a silhouette emerged from the fog. The same kid. He stood still. Then he said, "You saw them. Now you're one of us." I ran. I didn't know where. Through the bushes, through the wet leaves. I tripped. I fell, and I woke up in the morning on an ordinary asphalt road, a couple of kilometers from the highway. My truck was gone. No marks, no scratches on my ends, no scratches on my skin, nothing. The police later found my car in another state, empty, abandoned. There was no sign of presence in it. Even my thermos and ID were gone. I haven't driven at night since, and never on unfamiliar back roads. A lot of people think I'm making this up. That fatigue, Stress, loneliness on the highway played tricks on me, maybe, but sometimes I hear the whispers on the radio again. You shouldn't have left.